Good afternoon. My name is Amy Smollers, and I am Director of Healthcare Education and Professional Development at the Massachusetts Health and Hospital Association. And I want to welcome you to today's webinar, How to Identify and Overcome Imposter Syndrome. A few logistics before we start. If you have questions during the webinar, please place them in the chat feature as we are in listen-only mode today. The questions will come directly to us, and we will do our best to get them answered by the end of the presentation. I also want to take a moment to thank MHA's 2024 annual sponsors and strategic partners for their support in underwriting today's webinar, which is just one of many events we have to offer throughout the year to connect us with our members, with leading experts to help address timely issues like the one we have today. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker from GQR, Matt Bennett. Matt is the global head of talent at GQR and has worked in the recruitment industry for over 25 years. Over this time, he has worked as a consultant, executive coach, and head of learning and development. Matt is passionate and knowledgeable about employee development, retention, engagement, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So thank you so much for being here today, and we're really looking forward to this discussion. I know many of us are. So I will hand it over to Matt to get us started.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Amy, and good afternoon, everybody. Pleased to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen over on the other side. So one moment while I just get that loaded up. Okay, so good afternoon. Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. Really pleased to be here. It's my first webinar that I've done with MHA. So yeah, thank you very much for being here and allowing me the time. As Amy said, I'm Matt Bennett. I'm the head of global talent at GQR, one of your talent partners for MHA. Our role here is that we specialize very much in placing healthcare professionals in our allied locums and nursing spaces with a big focus on direct hire, helping organizations such as yourself to reduce reliance on travelers by providing permanent direct hire options. My background, as Amy mentioned, is I've been in the staffing industry now for 25 years in the talent space, in talent acquisition, learning and development as an executive coach and mentor in the industry. But I also work very extensively with our client network. And I work very much focusing on business strategies, looking at recruitment, retention, and performance strategies as an exec coach and leader. I'm actually based in Los Angeles, as you can probably tell by the sunshine here. I'm also not a native Angelino. I moved from London to Los Angeles back in 2018. So in my role, both internally and externally, in client development, in leadership development, and in coaching, imposter syndrome is one of the things that I have encountered both in my own experiences, in my own life, and also in what has shown up in a lot of conversations with clients over the years. It has been very prevalent in a lot of my coaching conversations over probably the last 15 to 20 years or so. So we chose this topic today to focus on imposter syndrome off the back of a lot of the work that has been done in previous sessions on psychological safety and the impact that that has on the workforce. By cultivating a workplace where people feel a sense of psychological safety is definitely one of the best antidotes to imposter syndrome. So before we dive into the content, can I get a quick pulse check in the chat, please, for your understanding and your experience of imposter syndrome? Give it a thumbs up or a yes if you have understood or learned a little bit about this before, or just heard the terminology previously in some of your work or some of your experiences. Excellent. Good to see a number of people familiar with it. When we were just doing the prep for this, it seemed like a very hot topic. It seemed like something that people were keen to learn a bit more about, both from their own sense of how they can recognize it and understand it in themselves, but also as a lot of leaders in the organization that we have on the call here today, what we can do to support others from a sense of psychological safety in their roles and in the work that we're doing there. Good. Okay. So let's dive into our agenda for today. So firstly, we're going to be looking at what is imposter syndrome and then the signs of imposter syndrome. So understanding what it is and where it comes from at the very heart of our focus for this afternoon. We'll then start to look at imposter syndrome and how systemic bias has an impact on imposter syndrome and some of the more recent work that has been done around systemic biases and how that amplifies imposter syndrome in the workplace. We'll then be looking at 5 different types of imposters from some research from a book that I read a while back, and looking at 5 different ways that it can show up as different types of imposter. And then we'll look at the solutions, so the intrinsic and the extrinsic solutions. So if we feel a sense of imposter syndrome in ourselves, what we can do to build and to overcome that, but also as leaders, how we can recognize it and how we can start to build an environment of psychological safety that lessens that sense of imposter syndrome in our teams. So let's start with what imposter syndrome actually is. I only learned the term imposter syndrome probably about 10, 15 years or so ago. And it was through a conversation with my leader at the time, probably one of the most influential women in my career. And she said to me after 6 months in the job, "Matt, do you still have the fear?" "The fear of what?" I said. "The fear of being found out," she replied. And that for me was very much that aha moment of being blown away, by her insight into exactly how I was feeling, but wondering how that had shown up in my conversations with her over the last 6 months. Because internally, I'd felt that every single one-to-one was going to be my last, that every time I talked her through something that I'd been working on or delivered, it would be that she maybe didn't understand it, or I'd kind of hoodwinked her into making it feel like it was a good job versus a bad job. It really did feel like she'd read my mind at that point. And from that moment on, I started to recognize it more in myself, but also started to hear other people talking about it and recognize it in others around me. And so the aim of this masterclass is to help to shine a light on what it is, where it comes from, and to hopefully support those who may feel a sense of imposter syndrome around them to rise to their full potential and hopefully create an environment of psychological safety. Now, just a disclaimer to start off with, despite hosting this masterclass on imposter syndrome, I'm not a psychologist. I do definitely have a sense of imposter syndrome, but I'm not an expert in it. And therefore, my own sense of imposter syndrome right now is sky high. So in essence, what that feels like for me at this point is this is what I believe I know, and this is what I think that others know. The reality actually is that this is what I know, and this is what others around me know. But my beliefs in my mind are becoming a fact. They are self-fulfilling, and my beliefs are not facts, they are merely beliefs. But I've definitely got that sense of a psychological pattern where at any point I'm going to be found out as a fraud. And despite all of the external evidence to the contrary, that you are competent at what you do, that you are succeeding in the role that you're in, and that you do deserve everything that you've achieved, somewhere inside you, there's that sense that tells you the opposite. There's that inner voice, which we'll talk a bit more about later on, that consistently says that you don't belong here, and this isn't the right place for you, and that others know more than you do. It's the sense that everything that you've achieved has been there by good fortune rather than hard work. Again, in the chat, just mention if this resonates with you. Are these the type of feelings that you are familiar with? Are these some of the things that are showing up with you in your sense of imposter syndrome? That feeling of being a fraud, that feeling of being found out and not maybe deserving exactly your position that you're in. You can see that definitely does. Absolutely. Good. So if it is, then let's look at where it comes from and most importantly, what we can start to do about it. So imposter syndrome in action. If you feel that some of these things are familiar to you, you are definitely not alone. Here's a couple of quotes from some familiar faces and how imposter syndrome has shown up for them. So a quote from actress Emma Watson and a quote from Maya Angelou. They've definitely seen that sense of imposter syndrome showing up, them feeling that they can't live up to what everybody thinks and that they feel that somebody is going to find them out at any minute. So the term imposter syndrome was first coined back in 1978 by 2 researchers, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes. Clance and Imes interviewed 150 high-achieving women about their successes in education and in business back in 1978. What they noticed when they were looking back and analyzing all of those language patterns that they observed is that there was a great deal of self-deprecation in the language that the high-achieving women used. If they'd achieved high marks in exams, it must have been a straightforward paper. If they'd been promoted at work, it's because nobody else wanted the job. If they were praised at work, it's because their boss was in a good mood. They rarely attributed their own success to their hard work and their talent. And initially, the research very much focused on women and how that self-deprecating language was very prevalent in women. But today, it's very much seen that it is relevant across the gender spectrum. Men definitely see imposter syndrome as something that they have, but they deal with it in a very different way. So they often see it as a sign of vulnerability, and therefore their way to manage that is to overcompensate by oversharing their successes publicly. Whereas women are much less prone to do that. And there's also evidence that if they do overshare their successes publicly, they can be penalized for doing so as well. So if it is familiar to you, you're not alone. So where does it come from? As with many of these different types of syndromes that we can observe in people, there's a lot of impact that comes from childhood and from a young age. Our inner core beliefs are set from childhood, and the different experiences that we have at a very young age have a huge impact on how imposter syndrome can show up. And these are just some of the ways that it can show up in childhood. So firstly, mixed messages. Often parents and teachers have got a very different view on how experienced or how successful or how effective a child is at doing something. Their parents are probably much more positive about how a child is performing. Their teacher may have a more, let's say, objective view in doing so, which leads to questions that children have in themselves and their own performance. Are they actually good at doing something or less so? Next, labeling your child and making that a self-fulfilling prophecy. Is he really the funny one? Is she really the clever one? That can cause a lot of input and internal stress in an individual, which can lead further in life to imposter syndrome. Next, any significant life events that can occur during childhood. So the effects of bereavement or divorce on children and how that can impact later on in life. Then into family norms and the family dynamics of having siblings, an older sibling, a younger sibling, or being the middle child, and how that can have an impact. And what those family norms then have in the way that they create imposter syndrome. Because there can be different pressures, whether that can be breaking or conforming with family norms. Was there an expectation that you would follow your path that your parents led and become a doctor? Or were you the first in your school or your college to graduate in your family? We also have then those family dynamics where you rank within the structure of the family, what your older brother or your younger sister's success looked like, and how that made you feel in potentially a competitive family and competitive family values. Next, there are cultural expectations that have a huge impact. Was the expectation that you would work hard, stay at home to look after your family? Or that could be at odds with what you want to do. Or was there an expectation that you would go to university where maybe you didn't want to? Then cultural pressures. If you were growing up and you felt the expectations of your family, maybe to be the first to do something in an underrepresented community, and the pressure that had to either live up to or break family stereotypes. And then finally, systemic biases. When Clance and Imes first introduced the notion of imposter syndrome, this stemmed from the self-deprecating language patterns that they observed in women. But the concept excluded the effects of systemic racism, systemic sexism, and other biases within the workplace. So while the root cause of imposter syndrome can be traced back to events like these from childhood, as soon as we get into the workplace, imposter syndrome is amplified by the systemic biases and the lack of psychological safety that we can experience at work. More on that a little bit later on. So how does it show up? So there are several ways that imposter syndrome can show up in an individual. We'll focus on the internal and the external ways. And they both focus around one thing, which is your inner voice and what your beliefs are telling you that creates a system that starts to be seen as fact. So firstly, internally. A very common way that that shows up internally in imposter syndrome is our inner voice. That little voice inside your head that can either kill or create endless possibilities with us. The voice that sometimes says that we can and that we should and that we're good enough, but also very often can say the opposite. And the truth is that both of those are correct. Whether you think that you can or you think that you can't, you're going to be correct. And this becomes then self-fulfilling. Before you can really overcome imposter syndrome, you've got to learn to really tune in and listen to your inner voice and understand what it's saying. Is it something that's positive or is it something that's holding you back? As Ariana Huffington put it in a recent interview, the greatest obstacle for me has been the little voice in my head that I call my obnoxious roommate. I wish someone would invent a tape recorder that we could attach to our brains to record everything we tell ourselves. We'd realize how important it is to stop this negative self-talk. It means pushing back against our obnoxious roommate with a heavy dose of wisdom. That's Ariana Huffington's version. My version is Brenda. Tuning into your internal commentary is the first step to help you overcome imposter syndrome. Me listening to Brenda and not allowing her to get away with her antics is one of my tactics to really help me to overcome my imposter syndrome. Add into the chat, is your internal self-talk generally positive? Is it inspiring you and telling you that you can? Or is it allowing doubt to creep in and potentially telling you that you can't? 50-50, okay, good, a little bit of both, absolutely. There will be moments where we definitely feel that there are times when we can excel, and that voice is being positive and spurring us on. But then if we allow that negativity to creep in, it can absolutely vary and sway us in the circumstance. But hopefully more moments of positivity than moments of doubt. But yes, definitely stressful situations are one, Peter, and ways that we can really see that show up is definitely in those stressful situations, or in newer situations where something is alien to us and we're doing something for the first time. Next, we have the external versions. So this was what Clance and Imes first noticed in how we are then externalizing our inner voice inside us. So in the speech patterns that we are sharing, where we negate any compliments that we get, where we say, yes, I passed the test, but the paper was easy. All those different ways that we've spoken about so far of putting ourselves down rather than building ourselves up. It's the external validation of the inner voice that we have that we're sharing in our own heads. So let's look at 5 different types of imposters. And again, in the chat, as we're going through these 5 different types, just jot something in there if it is resonating with you. So following from Clance and Imes' research, Dr. Valerie Young, in her book, Why Capable People Suffer from Imposter Syndrome, she builds on decades of research of studying those fraudulent feelings that many high achievers have. And she looked at those in 5 different types of imposter. See if you recognize any of these as we go through. So firstly, the perfectionist. You can see this gentleman here measuring the length of his grass. The perfectionist is definitely someone who, if you think about it, it's likely to go hand in hand with an imposter. They set the bar extremely high for themselves. They have incredibly high standards and goals for themselves. And when they fail to reach it, they experience major self-doubt in the way that they've been working and worry about measuring up to others around them. And whether they realize it or not, they can also be control freaks, very much those that like to be in control and like the power. They like to feel that something is done right. And if that is the case, probably the only way to do that is to do it themselves. So therefore, they are perfectionists. They will take on too much work and not allow others to really come into their space and to do some work with them. If you're not sure if this applies to you, ask yourself some of these questions. Have you ever been accused of being a micromanager? Do you have great difficulty delegating, even when you're able to do so? Do you feel frustrated by the results that you deliver or that others deliver? And when you miss the insanely high mark on something, do you accuse yourself of not being cut out for the job and ruminate on it for days? So for this type of imposter, success is rarely satisfying because they believe they could have always done better, which must be absolutely exhausting to be in that kind of continual cycle of working really hard, but always feeling that you need to do much better. And that's not productive and it's not healthy. So owning and celebrating your achievements is essential if you want to avoid burnout. And I know that's another topic that has been very prevalent in some of the sessions that you've done recently. But finding commitment, finding contentment, and understanding that you are doing well and you are doing a good job is one of the first steps to cultivating that sense of self-confidence to avoid being a perfectionist. The next is the superhero. So since people who have experienced this phenomenon are convinced that they are phonies amongst us real deal colleagues, they often think that they need to work much, much harder than their colleagues do to really measure up to them. But it's just a false cover-up for their insecurities. They want to work harder, they want to overload themselves, they want to take on more, they want to do more than others around them to be seen as being a superhero in the team. So if this applies to you, some of these questions may resonate. Do you work longer, harder, later than others, even maybe past the point that that work has been completed? Do you get stressed or feel that you should be working when you're not working? And do you find downtime wasteful and feel that there could be something more productive that you're doing work-wise? Do you put your hobbies and your passions to one side to be sacrificed for the work that you're doing instead? And do you often talk about work? Is work really synonymous with you and your personal brand and how hard you work? Imposter workaholics, those superheroes, really need that validation from the work that they do. But it's the validation that they need rather than the work itself that gives them that validation. So as you become more in tune with what gives you internal validation, hopefully you can nurture your inner confidence and state that the work that you have done is ample and that you'll be able to ease your foot off the gas and continue with some of those external passions. Next, we have the natural genius, the one that puts huge pressure on themselves to learn things quickly and to show that they can pick things up fast in front of other people. Those are the type of people that don't like to learn in front of others because they want to be seen as being really effective and to learn things quickly. Again, they set the bar for themselves impossibly high on this, just like perfectionists. But they don't judge themselves based on ridiculous expectations. They also judge themselves on getting it right first time, something that very few of us are actually able to do in practice. And when they're not able to do something right first time, their inner alarm bell sounds, again, that they are a fraud and that they're a phony. So if you're not sure if this applies to you, think about this. How used are you to doing work without much effort to excel and to do well? Are you the type of person that has a track record of getting straight A's or gold stars in everything that you do, and you expect that to happen in every part of your life? And when you're faced with setback, do you feel a sense of that it's given your confidence a tumble? Have you learned something slower than others? And again, therefore, that brings out those fraudulent feelings. Next, the soloist. This is the type of person that doesn't ask for help. They see that as a sign of weakness and a sign that they are not as effective in their roles as they would like to be seen. It's okay to be independent, but not to the extent that you refuse assistance that could improve the work and get the job done better or faster. This would apply to you if you maybe feel that you are best at accomplishing things on your own, that you don't feel that you need others' help, that you dislike the idea of having maybe a mentor or somebody to coach you through things. And do you frame requests in terms of the needs of the project or the task rather than your own learns and how you could develop? If so, think about how you supported others and the value and the benefit that they've seen from the work that you've done with them and how that can be the same vice versa. And finally, the experts. Experts measure their competence based on what and how much they know or how much they can do, believing that they will never ever be able to know or learn enough, and their fear of being exposed if they're not an absolute expert in everything that they do. So for example, have you avoided applying for jobs in the past unless you meet every single educational requirement? Are you constantly seeking out new learning opportunities and new training so that you're always seen as the expert in the field? If so, it's always positive to learn, and we want to strive forward to improve your skill set, but sometimes it can be taken too far, and endlessly seeking out information can actually be a form of procrastination. Next, confirmation bias. If some of these types of imposters resonated with you, and I saw in the chat that many did, it's definitely time to update your belief system. Your beliefs are not facts. They are a series of beliefs that you have acquired over the years that may feel like it's the real deal. They may feel like it's the truth, but it's not. There is a cognitive heuristic at play here that's very common, not just in imposter syndrome, but in many aspects of our lives, called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is where you believe something so much that any evidence to the contrary is discounted. In imposter syndrome, that shows up as being able to ignore all the good stuff and only welcome in the bad stuff. In her book, The Imposter Cure, Jessamy Hibbard described it as like a children's shape sorting toy. hence the image here. She said, for the positives to make it through, they must be exactly the right shape, the right size, and the right angle. The negatives are a free-for-all open bucket with plenty of room to spare. We filter out the good and we welcome in the bad with a red carpet. Very common in imposter syndrome is that sense of confirmation bias, only welcoming in the negatives and having space for all of that to build our belief system and to reinforce our belief system, but not necessarily believing some of the positives that we're hearing. So finally, let's look at some of the solutions. Firstly, our intrinsic solutions. A great way to do it is to begin to filter out some of the negative and build a list of what is good. What are the good accomplishments? My grandmother used to have a boasting book on her coffee table for each of her grandchildren that said how much we'd grown, what school plays we were in, our school grades, all of that stuff. You need one of those for yourself. So start to list your own accomplishments. What are you proud of? So sometimes when that negative self-talk is taking over and winning, we can go back to the real facts of what we've achieved and why we've achieved it. Normalize it. Start to speak to others around you. If you know that some of your colleagues have joined this website, chat afterwards around how this has shown up for you and different ways that you've managed this in your lives. But normalizing it and seeing that it is common helps to give it some kind of less power in our lives. Another way of giving it less power is to name it. We've spoken about the annoying roommate and Brenda so far. Those are just different ways that we can name it to normalize it and to give it less power. As we're going through this list, some of the weird ones in here may be actually the best ones, and sometimes it can actually be a combination of these as well that is going to work with you. So try maybe one or two of these rather than just focusing on one. Next, challenge your self-limiting beliefs and then look for facts or examples that really test them. What is the criteria that you feel is holding you back? Did your manager actually get fooled into thinking that you did a good job? No, they're smarter than that. Was it really down to the team that you delivered? No, you drove the team and you delivered that yourself. So really start to challenge and question those self-limiting beliefs in your inner voice. Next, accept compliments. When other people are praising you, don't bat it back. Don't negate the compliment. Just say thank you and take it, and potentially add it to your list of accomplishments. Let go of control. There's only going to be certain things that we can control and many things that we can't. So start to let go of some of the control of the things that we cannot control. Next, start to think about what you do well and really build your experience and your expertise around the things that you do well. Yes, we want to move into our out of our comfort zone into those things that we need to practice and those things that we want to get better in, but really focus on the things that we do well first. Own your success and your failure in equal measure. We're not going to get everything right first time, and we want to own our success and our failure in equal measure. Think about them both in the same way as being path on the journey to our own development. Speak up. If you're struggling, I've lost count of the number of times that people have said, actually, I'm lost in this. Can somebody help me? Only for everybody else around them to say the same thing and to want to learn more and to ask more questions. And next, don't be a swan. Somewhere underneath, none of us really know what we're doing all of the time. So own that. Own your vulnerability. Know when it's time to be cool and calm and collected, and know when it's time to show that vulnerability. So if those are the things intrinsically we can do to show how we can start to normalize it, limit its power, let go of control, and to speak up, these are some of the extrinsic solutions. So really from a leadership perspective, what we should be doing in order to build our teams around us and a sense of psychological safety in the teams that we have. So firstly, give recognition and feedback when it's due and compliment people around you on the work that they're doing. If you're hearing negative language back, reassure them that they did do a good job. It was a team effort, but they really deserve the credit. Be clear to tell others around you when they're doing a good job, but also give feedback when it's due if it's negative feedback as well, but be consistent. Let them know that they are going to receive some praise and some development areas. If you offer someone help and they push you back, they may be a soloist and they want to do it themselves, but don't let that put you off asking them again. The more that we show that we are open to offering assistance and sharing our knowledge and expertise, hopefully the experts and the soloists will be more open to receiving. Next, don't embarrass people in public. Really removes that element of psychological safety. If they feel they need to be a natural genius, they'll want to get it right first time. So yes, share feedback, but don't embarrass them in public if they don't get it right first time. Next, an inclusive environment, and one that fosters different leadership styles where gender, race, ethnicity, sexuality, and all other characteristics are seen as positive factors and not ones that are limiting factors in imposter syndrome. When we're seeing and hearing microaggressions, call those out in the workplace because they are there to amplify those feelings of not being in a safe and equitable environment. And then finally, and this is a big one, don't fix people, fix work. When the topic of imposter syndrome comes up, we often talk in terms of people being diagnosed and people suffering from it. And therefore, we focus more on the cure than the cause itself. But by really focusing on the cause of it, that's where we can start to undo some of the work that is building people's self-limiting beliefs. Yes, a lot of that impact comes from childhood, but surely so does being made to feel in the workplace that as either a woman or a person of color or another underrepresented community, that your contributions are less valid than those of others. Creating an equitable workspace where we all feel free to contribute, to share our ideas and opinions is going to remove that element of not feeling psychological safety and relying on the cure and not just the cause. So rely on fixing the people, but also the workplace in equal measure. And that is it. Thank you very much for your attendance today. I know we are at time, but if we have time for questions, I'm more than happy to throw some questions in the chat and absolutely spend a bit of time working through any of those questions that we may have. Also, I've added my email address at the bottom there. So if anybody wants to reach out afterwards with any questions, more than happy to do so as well.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for all those who are live today. It's been very lively in the chat feature, which is great. And it shows that you know, a lot of us, I will speak for myself. I found this very informative and took a few notes myself. And one thing, and we you know, folks have been asking about getting the recording and the slides, and we will do that for sure when we can get that. What is, well, this is a hard question to ask, but like one thing, if someone after this afternoon or today or tomorrow, what is a good first step in either addressing this as an individual who's feeling this or as a leader who's a little more aware now of some of the things that we do that we could help to mitigate some of that?
Great question. So the first thing I would do is to tune into your inner voice. So really start to listen in, but potentially to list out the times and the experiences and the language that you're telling yourself that either tells you that you can or tells you that you can't. And by doing that and doing some of the analysis almost that Clance and Imes did in their work, you'll start to see the different language patterns that you're telling yourself and the circumstance and the situation that you're seeing that come to the forefront more in. Is it moments of stress? Is it moments of doing something new? Or is it actually something that is just more common and that you're feeling and seeing and hearing in your own mind on a more regular basis? Once we've done that, we can start to look at how to overcome it. So looking at what we can do in those particular moments of stress to start to bring that down. Looking what we can do in those different moments of learning something new in order to overcome it. I definitely think those 5 types of imposters are important as well. So understanding if there are elements in there that resonate with you as either a soloist or as an expert or as a perfectionist, what's driving you to do that? And what can we recognize in that to start to undo it? For me, honestly, Brenda, I talk about Brenda a lot. So Brenda is my inner voice inside my head. And there's moments where I just have to tell her to pipe down because she's taking over. She's telling me things that I don't need to hear, and they are stopping me from doing the things that I want to be doing. And it was really only when I started to honestly speak to her, but speak to her in quite a negative way, that she moves out of the picture and allows me to move forwards with the things that I can do. So it's definitely something that Ariana Huffington picked up on. I've picked up on it as well. And I now talk in terms of Brenda as well. My partner sometimes talks to Brenda as well on my behalf.
Well, thank you, Matt. And as you said, we will be sure again to share the slides, the recording, and you have a great group of resources, including whether it be books or links or videos, and everyone will have your contact information. So I suspect your inbox and folks will be busy soon with this information.
Yeah, feel free to reach out if you have any questions on the topic. On the next slide that we've got, I've got about 6 or 7 resources as well books, articles, those type of things that are my go-tos that I either work with my coachees on, the people that I'm mentoring, because yeah, they always want to learn and to read a little bit more on it. And if you're interested in learning a bit more about it and want to extend your leadership journey through some of the work that we do in GQR as well, please reach out.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you very much on behalf of myself, MHA, and all the folks who attended today. And we really appreciate your time, and for those attending as well. We have future events, as like these, and we look forward to seeing you all, and have a great afternoon.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, everyone.